Would you believe it if I told you after this week there's only 2 weeks left of e-learning? So you're headed down the home stretch. Keep working hard. You're almost there. And with that being said, this week brings us our last religion book lesson, and then I'm giving you the 2 weeks of May to work on your final Easter evaluations. So let's dive into our last Easter lesson. In Lesson 76, we are going to be talking about Jesus' trials. And yes, he went before many people. It kind of took a lot of dirty work to get Jesus on the cross by a lot of crooked people. I'm going to read to you from John chapter 18, verses 19 through 24. The high priest, we're talking about Annas, then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I have said to them. They know what I said. And when he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, Is this how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me? Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So as you hear, Annas is referred to as the high priest, although he is not the current high priest. It's sort of how we talk about our presidents. Like, even though President Obama isn't president currently, President Trump is, we still say President Obama just to show him respect for the office that he held. And we would say the same thing about President Bush, President Reagan. Any president is always called president, even after he or she is out of office. And that's sort of how the high priests were treated. Even after they left the office, they were still called the high priest. So we'll read that first paragraph in your book on Lesson 76. Annas was not the high priest and had no authority to conduct a trial. This pre-trial was illegal. Trials could not be held at night, and a prisoner could not be convicted the same day he was arrested. This trial was just a stalling tactic to give the high priest time to gather the Sanhedrin. So we see, again, there's lots of wiggle and lots of deceit and wrongdoings to get Jesus to the cross. So now in the next phase of the trial, we have Caiaphas, the actual high priest, and all of the Sanhedrin gathered to question Jesus. And I'm going to read to you from Mark 14, verses 55 to 65. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witnesses against him, but their testimonies did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witnesses against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Yet even about this their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But Jesus remained silent and made no answer. Again the high priest asked him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments and said, What further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned Jesus as deserving death. And some began to spit on him, and to cover his face, and strike him, saying to him, Prophesy! And the guards received him with blows. So this, I think, is one of the cruelest parts of his trial. And I'm going to read to you what it says in your book, Caiaphas. False witnesses, that means people who are lying, could not agree on anything Jesus had done wrong. The high priest hoped to catch Jesus in his own words, so he directly asked Jesus if he was the Son of God. And when Jesus answered, the high priest tore his clothes in anger and said that this was blasphemy, which means lies against God, and that Jesus deserved punishment by death. And the Sanhedrin or the council agreed. However, They were just religious leaders, and they were not allowed to sentence anyone to death. And this is where Pontius Pilate enters the story. Pontius Pilate was a Roman official, so he could put Jesus to death. And the church leaders knew that the Romans would not care about the religious accusations of blasphemy, so they had to approach the Romans with political accusations so that they would be convinced that Jesus deserved death. So they said Jesus stirred up the people, and Pilate would be afraid of that, knowing how rebellious the Jewish people could be, and that Jesus called himself a king. Now, Jesus meant, he was the king of the heavenly kingdom, and Pilate was concerned about that because Caesar was the king, ruler of the Roman Empire. Now Pilate, he tried many different approaches to resolve this incident with the Jewish people and Jesus. So one of the first things he did was he sent Jesus to Herod, but that didn't work. Herod just sent him back, and as we know, Pilate eventually sentenced Jesus to death, but he washed his hands of it. And washing his hands of it meant, I really don't agree, but I'm going to follow the people's wishes. So let's take a look at the paragraphs on Pilate and Herod. Pontius Pilate could see that Jesus was innocent, but he was afraid that the people would rise up in anger if he set Jesus free. When he heard Jesus was from Galilee, he sent Jesus to Herod. When that and the other tactics did not work, Pilate finally gave Jesus over to the people to be crucified. Herod was curious about Jesus and wanted him to perform a miracle. When Jesus was silent and did nothing, Herod was not amused and sent Jesus back to Pontius Pilate. So for the most part, we see that Jesus was pretty quiet during his trials and didn't answer many of the leaders. Well, why was he so quiet at his trials? Why didn't he defend himself and speak out in anger or try to get away? No one could have captured and held Jesus unless he willingly set aside his power, meaning Jesus could escape anything. He could walk through walls. He could do whatever he wanted. He is God. Jesus did this willingly so that he could suffer the punishment for sin in our place. Hundreds of years earlier, the prophet Isaiah spoke of this, saying, He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that goes before his shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. That is in the Old Testament, Isaiah 53:7. And in fact, the entire chapter of Isaiah 53 gives an amazingly detailed account of what would happen to the Messiah and why. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. That means God has laid on Jesus the sins of us all. So a bonus would be to read Isaiah 53 and come up with one of the prophecies you see in there of what would happen to Jesus that came true as we read the stories in the New Testament about Jesus on the cross. So if you're on Google Classroom and you want to comment on the comments one of those prophecies, that would be amazing. All righty, now we're going to get into the meat of the lesson where you got to do the work. I'm going to help you out by giving you the Bible verses where to find the answers. However, I'm really not going to stop. So my recommendation to you is to pause the video each time you need to go look up a verse and write down the answers, and then come back to the video. Alrighty, here we go. Guilty. If you had been Jesus' defense lawyer at his trials, what could you have said to defend him against each of the accusations? So there's 4 accusations. Accusation 1. His enemies said that Jesus threatened to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. You're going to find your defense for Jesus in John 2, verses 18 through 22. So go look up that verse and write down what would be a good defense for Jesus to that accusation. Accusation 2. His enemies said Jesus spoke blasphemy, making himself equal to God. You're going to find the defense for that one in John 14, verses 8 through 11. Push pause, go find it. Accusation 3. His enemies said Jesus stirred up and agitated the people. Well, go find the defense for that one in Matthew 9, verses 35 and 36. The last accusation, accusation 4, his enemies said Jesus opposed Caesar because he called himself a king. You're going to find the defense for that one in Matthew 22, verses 17 through 21. That should help you get done with the whole top guilty section. Now I'm going to help you with the bottom half. Guilty? If Jesus was not guilty, who is? Duh, we are. You know why we're guilty? Because we are all sinners. So we're going to read each Bible verse and explain it in our own words, and then check off if it's true or not. So the very first verse, 1 John 1, verse 8. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. That means, well, we're liars if we say we do not sin. Now, I don't know if I was going to check the box or not, because I definitely am a liar at times. Definitely have lied, so I could check it if I'm a liar. But I know I'm a sinner, so I never say I don't sin. I know I sin. Number 2, or the second box. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Psalm 51, verse 4. That verse is simply saying that it is against God that we sin, and only God. So, ding ding, that definitely applies to me because I sin, and my sins are against God. Third box. Your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God. Isaiah 59, 2. And remember, iniquities is another word for sin, and so our sins separate us from God. Check, check, check. Absolutely truth. The last box. The wages of sin is death. Romans 6:23. Wages are something you earn for your work. So what I earn for my sins is death. Absolutely. That's what I earned. But thankfully, Jesus gave me eternal life. But I'm definitely checking that box. This would be a grim story if it stopped here. But we know that Jesus took our guilt on himself. He took our punishment on himself. The Son of God makes us children of God. His righteousness makes us righteous. Draw a large cross over this whole section and change its title to, because through the cross of Jesus we are now judged not guilty. Jesus has reconciled us so that in God's eyes we are holy, blameless, and above reproach. Amen. All right, this week's memory. And you can fill in the blanks at the bottom of page 59 as well. I'm going to give you those answers. And you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. We are holy and blameless. That is an awesome feeling and an awesome truth if we grasp that. And that, my 6th grade friends, is your last memory verse of your 6th grade year. Hallelujah! Now, by having this e-learning and getting cut short, we're going to miss probably one of the most important lessons, lesson 78. But since we're doing the Easter project, I felt like, okay, I can do without doing lesson 78 because you're doing an Easter project. But lesson 78, of course, is all about Easter when Jesus rises from the dead. So if you need some bonus points for your religion grade, you can do lesson 78 and take pictures of it and turn it into me for bonus in religion. Now, we're going to talk about the Easter evaluation options. You have 5 choices, and this is a big old chunk of your grade, so do good and take your time. You have 2 weeks in May to get this done, so I expect some good stuff from you kiddos. Our first option is Easter inspiration, and you're going to create 10 inspirational Easter slides. You must have 7 biblical Easter verses, meaning you need to have 7 Bible verses that are related to Easter. They don't have to have the word Easter in it. In fact, I don't think Easter is in the Bible. But you might want to Google Easter Bible verses and find them that way. Now, the catch with this one, what makes it a little bit tough, is you can't just Google images and get your images for the background. Each of the images in your background have to be your own creation. So the first step I would do would be to find your 7 Bible verses that you're going to do and think about what kind of background you would like for them. And then go around your house or your neighborhood and start snapping photos that you think would make great backgrounds, or create them with your own artistic abilities. But you create the backgrounds. Now, 4 of those slides already have a topic in hand on the last box. One has to be the Last Supper, one has to be Palm Sunday, one has to be the crucifixion, and one slide has to be about the resurrection. The other 6 slides are your choice, but they have to be Easter related. 7 of the slides need Bible verses on them. What about the other 3? Well, you can do maybe an Easter greeting, an Easter poem, or other Easter related sayings that you would like to add to your slide. So you need 10 inspirational slides, all 10 with your creative juices creating the backgrounds. The next idea for your Easter evaluation would be an Easter stop motion video. This one I didn't get to do last year. I'm hoping one of you kids picked this option because I love stop motion videos. But your video needs to have a title and an intro. You need to have your voice telling the story in the background, and music and sound effects are always great storytelling tools. So just use your imagination. You can use Legos, clay figures, and even paper characters to create cool stop motion videos. YouTube a few stop motion videos to get the ideas flowing. Another fun option for kids, and a lot of kids chose this last year, was the 7 Statements from the Cross art series. And one thing you're going to need to know are the 7 statements made from Jesus by the cross. You can Google those, or I have them right here for you. If you want to pause the video and look at the 7 statements Jesus made from the cross. I think that's in lesson 77. And what an art series is you take the same style of art. So I put down here a totally non-religious example would be Monet. And he did Impressionist art, where everything looks kind of blurry. And he just did water lilies and certain flowers in that Impressionism. So you're going to pick an art style, and you're going to make 7 different art pieces in that style, and each art piece is going to have one of the statements of Jesus from the cross. All your artwork should be nothing any smaller than 8.5 by 11 paper, and you can just take pictures of those and turn them into me one at a time. So that would be 7 pictures that you would be turning into me. A children's book would be one that you're probably going to have to drop off to me at school, where you're going to write a children's book that depicts the Easter story. You're going to have a minimum of 10 pages and 10 illustrations that's appropriate for children. And the words of the Easter story must be biblically based and child appropriate. And your book also must definitely have a cover page with the title, your name, and some artwork. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And the last one that I've had students do, and it's always one of my favorite things, is you will write an Easter song, you will have the lyrics, you will create the melody, and you will perform and record your Easter song. So, and just share that with me, your recording of your song. Unfortunately, we can't do this, but I've had kids sing their songs in chapel before. So it's always amazing to me, the creative power of you middle school kids. So I cannot wait to see your Easter projects. Again, you have 2 weeks to get that in. Make them amazing.